On October 15, 1988, Detective Sergeant Robert Harrison, a 34-year-old veteran investigator with the Chicago Police Department's Special Crimes Unit, a series of ritualistic murders that had been terrorizing the city's South Side for months. Harrison, known for his meticulous investigative methods and unwavering dedication to justice, had been employed by the Chicago PD for 12 years, earning commendations for his work on organized crime cases, drug trafficking investigations, and homicide cases that other detectives had given up on as unsolvable. The decorated officer had been particularly obsessed with a pattern of killings involving young women who had been found in abandoned buildings throughout the South Side, each victim displaying evidence of elaborate ritualistic torture and mutilation that suggested the work of either a highly organized cult or an individual with extensive knowledge of occult practices. On that fateful October evening, Harrison had told his partner, Detective Maria Rodriguez, that he had received an anonymous tip about a potential suspect and was going to check out an abandoned warehouse on the 2700 block of South State Street, where witnesses claimed to have seen suspicious activity during late-night hours. Where are you reading from? Share your city and country in the comments before continuing this story. Harrison's last radio contact with dispatch occurred at 9:47 p.m., when he reported arriving at the location and stated that he would maintain radio silence while conducting surveillance, a standard procedure for undercover investigations that required stealth and discretion. When Harrison failed to report back within the agreed-upon 2-hour time frame and didn't respond to repeated radio calls, his partner Rodriguez immediately requested backup and initiated a search of the warehouse location. The initial search revealed Harrison's unmarked police vehicle parked in an alley behind the building, engine still running and driver's door left wide open. But the detective himself was nowhere to be found, despite an exhaustive search of the multi-story warehouse and surrounding area by K-9 units and multiple search teams. 11 years later, in 1999, construction workers renovating the same warehouse would make a discovery so disturbing and inexplicable that it would challenge everything law enforcement thought they knew about the case and reveal a truth so horrific that many of the investigators involved would require psychological counseling to process what they had uncovered in the building's hidden sub-basement levels. The initial investigation, led by Chicago PD Captain Thomas O'Brien, became one of the most extensive missing person searches in the department's history, involving federal agencies, specialized search and rescue teams, and extensive interviews with everyone connected to Harrison's ongoing cases and personal life. The search revealed the complexities inherent in investigating the disappearance of a law enforcement officer who had been working multiple sensitive cases involving dangerous criminals, organized crime figures, and individuals with access to resources that could facilitate the elimination of threats to their operations. Investigators meticulously reviewed all of Harrison's active case files, including detailed reports on the ritualistic murders he had been investigating, financial records of suspects under surveillance, and notes from confidential informants who had been providing information about cult activities in the South Side area. Analysis of Harrison's personal life revealed no significant deaths, marital problems, or behavioral changes that could suggest voluntary disappearance, and interviews with his wife, children, and extended family confirmed he had been looking forward to his daughter's upcoming high school graduation and had made no preparations that would indicate planned departure. The investigation expanded to include the possibility that Harrison had been eliminated by organized crime figures or cult members who had discovered his investigation, with particular attention to a suspect known only as the Architect, who had been mentioned in several witness statements related to the ritualistic murders but had never been positively identified. Search teams used tracking dogs to examine the warehouse thoroughly, while specialized units with ground-penetrating radar scanned the building's floors and surrounding grounds for any indication of disturbed earth or hidden spaces where Harrison might have been concealed. Authorities also investigated the possibility that Harrison had been kidnapped and transported to another location, considering that the ritualistic nature of the murders he had been investigating suggested perpetrators with access to private properties or remote locations where they could conduct their activities without detection. As weeks turned into months without significant progress, the investigation began to consider more disturbing scenarios, including the possibility that Harrison had become a victim of the same individuals responsible for the ritualistic murders, potentially becoming the subject of the same elaborate torture and mutilation that had characterized the other crime scenes. The case attracted considerable media attention throughout the Midwest, with newspapers and television stations providing regular updates on the search effort, and Harrison's family organizing community vigils to maintain public awareness and pressure on law enforcement to continue their efforts. Despite the involvement of FBI behavioral analysts, occult crime specialists, and forensic experts from multiple jurisdictions, no concrete evidence of Harrison's fate was discovered during the initial investigation period, leaving his family and colleagues to grapple with uncertainty about whether he was dead or being held captive by his captors. The 11 years that followed Detective Harrison's disappearance were marked by his family's relentless efforts to keep the case active and find answers, while dealing with the psychological trauma and financial hardship that his absence brought to their lives. Harrison's wife, Linda, became a tireless advocate for missing law enforcement officers, organizing annual memorial services, lobbying for improved officer safety protocols, and maintaining constant pressure on the Chicago PD to continue investigating her husband's case, even as newer cases took priority and resources. Harrison's children, Michael age 16 and Sarah age 14, at the time of his disappearance, grew up under the shadow of their father's mysterious fate, requiring extensive counseling and support services to help them process the trauma of having a parent vanish without explanation or closure. The family used their savings and took out loans to hire private investigators specializing in missing persons cases, including experts in cult deprogramming, organized crime investigations, and forensic analysis, who reviewed the case files using more advanced techniques than had been available during the original investigation. During this extended period, the family received dozens of false leads and fraudulent claims from individuals seeking the reward money that had been offered for information about Harrison's fate, each potential breakthrough requiring expensive investigation only to result in dead ends or deliberate deception. The Chicago PD's Special Crimes Unit, where Harrison had worked, experienced significant changes in personnel and leadership during the 11-year period, with new detectives taking over Harrison's caseload and attempting to solve the ritualistic murders that had originally led to his investigation, but without success. The warehouse where Harrison had disappeared became a local landmark of sorts, with urban explorers, paranormal investigators, and curiosity seekers regularly attempting to gain access to the building despite its official closure and security measures, leading to numerous trespassing arrests and safety concerns. Media coverage of the case diminished over time, with occasional anniversary articles and television specials revisiting the mystery but offering no new insights or developments that could advance the investigation or provide hope to Harrison's family. The ritualistic murders that Harrison had been investigating also ceased after his disappearance, leading some investigators to speculate that his fate and the crimes were connected. But without physical evidence or witnesses, these theories remained unproven hypotheses rather than actionable leads. As 1999 approached, Harrison's family had begun to lose hope of ever finding answers, with some relatives suggesting it might be time to accept that he was deceased and focus on moving forward. But Linda Harrison remained inflexible in her determination to learn the truth about her husband's fate. The anniversary of Harrison's disappearance became an annual observance in the Chicago law enforcement community, serving as a reminder of the dangers faced by officers investigating the most dangerous criminals and the importance of officer safety protocols, backup procedures, and communication systems designed to prevent similar disappearances. On March 22, 1999, 11 years after Detective Harrison's disappearance, a construction crew hired to renovate the abandoned warehouse for conversion into loft apartments made an accidental discovery that would reopen the case in the most disturbing way possible when they uncovered a hidden entrance to previously unknown sub-basement levels that building records had never documented. The construction workers, led by foreman Jake Peterson from Midwest Renovation Services, had been tasked with installing new electrical systems throughout the building when they noticed structural inconsistencies in the basement floor that suggested the presence of additional space beneath the building's official foundation. Using jackhammers to break through what appeared to be a concrete seal covering a section of the basement floor, Peterson's crew discovered a narrow staircase leading down to a series of underground chambers that appeared to have been constructed specifically for concealment from building inspectors and city officials. When Peterson descended the stairs with high-powered flashlights to assess the space for potential structural issues, he encountered what he later described to investigators as the most nightmarish scene imaginable, a complex of interconnected rooms that had clearly been used for the ritualistic torture and murder of multiple victims over an extended period. The underground chambers contained evidence of systematic violence on a scale that dwarfed anything Chicago law enforcement had previously encountered, including elaborate torture devices, altars constructed from human bones, walls covered with occult symbols painted in what forensic analysis would later confirm was human blood, and preservation chambers containing partial human remains in various stages of decomposition. Peterson immediately contacted the Chicago Police Department, who dispatched the bomb squad before allowing crime scene investigators to enter the space due to concerns about booby traps or other hazards that might have been left by the perpetrators. Initial forensic examination of the underground chambers revealed evidence suggesting that the space had been actively used for criminal purposes from approximately 1987 through 1988, coinciding exactly with the timeline of both the ritualistic murders Harrison had been investigating and his own disappearance. Crime scene technicians discovered personal items belonging to Detective Harrison scattered throughout the chambers, including his service weapon, badge, wallet, and portions of his clothing, suggesting that he had been brought to this location and held here for an extended period before his ultimate fate was determined. The discovery not only provided answers about Harrison's disappearance, but also revealed the true scope of the criminal operation he had been investigating, exposing a network of ritualistic murder and torture that had operated with sophisticated concealment methods designed to avoid detection by law enforcement agencies. The forensic analysis of the underground chambers, conducted by a joint task force including Chicago PD homicide detectives, FBI behavioral analysts, and specialist consultants in ritualistic crime, revealed evidence so disturbing that many aspects of the investigation were classified to prevent public panic and protect the integrity of ongoing related investigations. Dr. Patricia Chen, the chief forensic pathologist assigned to the case, determined that the chambers had been the site of at least 47 individual murders committed between 1987 and 1988, with victims ranging in age from 14 to 45, and including both the previously known victims from Harrison's original investigation and numerous additional individuals whose disappearances had never been connected to the ritualistic murder series. The sophisticated nature of the underground facility, which included ventilation systems, electrical power, specialized restraint devices, and preservation equipment, indicated that the perpetrators had invested considerable time, money, and planning into creating a location where they could conduct their activities over extended periods without risk of discovery. Analysis of the physical evidence found in the chambers revealed that Detective Harrison had been held captive in the facility for approximately 6 weeks after his initial disappearance, during which time he had been subjected to the same ritualistic torture procedures that had been inflicted on the other victims, as evidenced by forensic examination of his remains and personal effects. The preservation chambers contained detailed documentation of the torture procedures, including photographs, video recordings, and written logs describing the ritualistic significance of various torture methods, and the perpetrators' belief that their actions were part of religious ceremonies designed to gain supernatural power through the suffering of their victims. Even more disturbing was the discovery that the perpetrators had been systematically selecting victims based on specific criteria related to their occupations, family structures, and personal characteristics, suggesting a level of planning and surveillance that had allowed them to identify and target individuals who would be ideal for their ritualistic purposes. Forensic analysis of the torture devices found in the chambers revealed evidence that they had been custom manufactured by individuals with extensive knowledge of both human anatomy and mechanical engineering, indicating that the operation involved multiple perpetrators with specialized skills and access to resources that enabled them to create sophisticated equipment for their criminal activities. The documentation found in the chambers also included detailed plans for expanding their operations to other cities, suggesting that the Chicago facility was intended to be the prototype for a much larger network of ritualistic murder sites that would have allowed the perpetrators to continue their activities on a national scale. Investigation of the building's ownership history revealed a complex web of shell companies and fraudulent transactions designed to conceal the true identity of the individuals who had purchased and modified the warehouse, with financial records indicating connections to organized crime figures, occult practitioners, and wealthy individuals who had provided funding for the facility's construction and operation. The criminal investigation that followed the discovery of the underground chambers triggered the largest joint task force operation in Chicago law enforcement history, involving federal agencies, international law enforcement organizations, and specialist units focused on organized crime, cult activities, and ritualistic murder cases. DNA analysis of biological evidence recovered from the chambers produced matches with several individuals in national and international criminal databases, leading to the identification of a core group of perpetrators who had been involved in similar crimes in other jurisdictions, including cities in California, New York, and several European countries where comparable ritualistic murders had occurred during the same time period. The investigation revealed that the Chicago operation had been part of an international network of individuals who shared a belief system that combined elements of ancient religious practices, modern occultism, and elaborate theories about gaining supernatural power through the systematic torture and murder of carefully selected victims. Confronted with overwhelming physical evidence linking them to the crimes, several suspects provided detailed confessions that revealed the true scope of the network's activities and the specific roles played by different members in selecting victims, conducting the ritualistic murders, and concealing evidence of their crimes. The confessions revealed that Detective Harrison had been specifically targeted for elimination after the perpetrators discovered that his investigation was approaching breakthrough discoveries that would have exposed their operations, with one of their members having infiltrated the Chicago PD as a civilian employee and providing inside information about the progress of Harrison's case. The network had been monitoring Harrison's activities for several weeks before his disappearance, learning his investigation methods, identifying his sources of information, and planning an elaborate trap that would allow them to capture him without arousing immediate suspicion from his colleagues or supervisors. Harrison's capture had been intended to serve multiple purposes within the group's belief system: eliminating a threat to their operations, obtaining information about other law enforcement investigations that might affect them, and conducting ritualistic torture on a victim whose occupation as a law enforcement officer was believed to provide particular supernatural benefits according to their occult practices. The investigation also revealed that Harrison had not been the only law enforcement officer targeted by the network, with evidence indicating that similar operations had been planned or attempted against detectives in other cities who had been investigating comparable ritualistic murders, though Harrison appeared to have been the only officer who had been successfully captured and murdered. The network's activities had extended far beyond simple murder, encompassing human trafficking, money laundering, drug distribution, and various forms of organized crime that had provided the financial resources necessary to maintain their elaborate facilities and continue their operations across multiple jurisdictions for extended periods. Evidence recovered from the chambers also included detailed records of the network's recruitment activities, showing how they had identified and indoctrinated new members by targeting individuals with histories of violence, occult interests, or psychological vulnerabilities that made them susceptible to manipulation and control by the group's leadership. The legal and social consequences of the Detective Harrison case extended far beyond the criminal prosecutions of the individuals directly involved, triggering comprehensive reforms in law enforcement safety protocols, interagency communication systems, and procedures for investigating organized crime groups with occult or ritualistic elements. The primary perpetrators, including the network's leader who had been identified as the architect from Harrison's original investigation, received multiple life sentences without possibility of parole for first-degree murder, conspiracy, kidnapping, and numerous other charges related to their extensive criminal activities spanning multiple jurisdictions and countries. The case inspired the creation of Harrison's Law, federal legislation requiring all law enforcement agencies to implement enhanced safety protocols for officers conducting solo investigations, including mandatory backup procedures, real-time GPS tracking systems, and regular check-in requirements designed to prevent similar disappearances from occurring in the future. The Chicago Police Department established the Detective Robert Harrison Memorial Unit, a specialized task force dedicated to investigating cases involving organized crime groups with ritualistic or occult elements, equipped with advanced training, specialized equipment, and direct access to federal resources that had not been available during Harrison's original investigation. Harrison's family used the substantial legal settlements from the case to establish the Harrison Foundation for Officer Safety, which provides training, equipment, and support services to law enforcement agencies nationwide, focusing particularly on the unique challenges faced by officers investigating organized crime groups with non-traditional criminal methodologies. The warehouse where Harrison was found was demolished entirely after the completion of the forensic investigation, with the site being converted into a memorial park dedicated to law enforcement officers who have died in the line of duty, serving as a permanent reminder of the dangers faced by those who investigate the most dangerous criminals in society. Harrison's story became a case study used in police academies, federal law enforcement training programs, and criminal justice courses throughout the United States, teaching about the importance of backup procedures, the recognition of organized crime indicators, and the specific challenges involved in investigating groups that combine criminal activity with ritualistic or religious elements. The investigation's revelations about the international scope of ritualistic murder networks led to enhanced cooperation between law enforcement agencies worldwide, with new protocols for sharing information about similar crimes and coordinated investigation procedures designed to prevent such networks from operating across jurisdictional boundaries. The case also prompted significant changes in building inspection procedures and property ownership verification systems, making it more difficult for criminal organizations to acquire and modify properties for illegal purposes without detection by regulatory agencies. Mental health support systems for law enforcement officers and their families were significantly expanded in response to the psychological trauma experienced by everyone involved in the investigation. Recognition that cases involving extreme violence and ritualistic elements require specialized counseling and support services beyond those typically available to law enforcement personnel. A decade after the discovery that finally provided answers about Detective Harrison's fate, the impact of his case continued to influence law enforcement practices and officer safety protocols throughout North America and internationally, while his memory served as a powerful reminder of the extreme dangers that can be faced by officers investigating organized crime groups with ritualistic or occult elements. The Harrison Foundation had grown to become a national organization, providing officer safety training to over 50,000 law enforcement personnel annually, having distributed advanced communication equipment, GPS tracking devices, and emergency alert systems to police departments in all 50 states and several international law enforcement agencies. Technological advances inspired by the case had resulted in the development of integrated officer safety systems that combined real-time location monitoring, automatic distress signal transmission, and rapid response protocols that could mobilize backup units within minutes of detecting officer distress or communication failure. Harrison's law had been adopted by all states and had inspired similar legislation in multiple countries, establishing international standards for officer safety during solo investigations and creating legal requirements for the advanced communication and tracking systems that had been developed in response to the case. Harrison's children, Michael and Sarah, now adults working in law enforcement and victim advocacy respectively, had found purpose in continuing their father's work by developing training programs that taught officers how to recognize and investigate organized crime groups with non-traditional criminal methodologies and ritualistic elements. The case had inspired multiple documentaries, books, and training materials that educated law enforcement personnel about the specific indicators of ritualistic crime, the investigation techniques most effective against organized groups with occult elements, and the psychological support resources necessary for officers and investigators working such cases. The Detective Robert Harrison Memorial Unit had expanded to become a national resource center, providing consultation services to law enforcement agencies worldwide when they encountered cases involving ritualistic murders, occult crime elements, or organized groups combining criminal activity with religious or pseudo-religious practices. Forensic techniques developed during the Harrison investigation had found broader applications in criminal investigations, being used by police departments internationally to examine hidden spaces in buildings, analyze ritualistic crime scenes, and identify physical evidence that might be overlooked using traditional forensic methods. Educational programs inspired by the case had reached millions of law enforcement officers worldwide, providing vital information about recognizing the warning signs of ritualistic crime, understanding the psychology of individuals involved in occult criminal activities, and accessing specialized resources when encountering cases that require expertise beyond traditional criminal investigation methods. The memorial park established at the site where Harrison was found had become a pilgrimage destination for law enforcement officers and their families, serving as both a tribute to Harrison and an educational center where visitors could learn about officer safety procedures and the importance of maintaining vigilance against organized crime groups that pose extreme dangers to investigating officers. 15 years after the truth about Detective Harrison's fate was finally revealed, his name had become synonymous with officer safety and the fight against organized crime groups that utilize ritualistic violence and occult practices to further their criminal objectives. His name appears on officer safety legislation in multiple countries, on advanced communication and tracking systems implemented in thousands of police departments, and in training programs that have educated hundreds of thousands of law enforcement officers about the recognition and investigation of ritualistic crime and organized groups with occult elements. The Harrison Foundation had evolved into an international organization with an annual budget of over $25 million funding research into officer safety technologies, providing specialized training programs for law enforcement agencies worldwide, and advocating for government policies that strengthened protections for officers investigating dangerous organized crime groups. Linda Harrison, now recognized internationally as a leading advocate for law enforcement officer safety, had found that transforming her personal tragedy into positive action had provided both healing and purpose in the decades since her husband's murder, becoming a respected figure in the law enforcement community and victim advocacy movements. The investigative techniques and safety protocols developed in response to the Harrison case had been adopted by law enforcement agencies in multiple countries facing similar challenges with organized crime groups that combine traditional criminal activities with ritualistic or religious elements, creating an international network of specialized units trained to handle such cases safely and effectively. The story had inspired fundamental changes in how law enforcement agencies approached cases involving organized crime groups with non-traditional elements, with many departments implementing specialized training programs, advanced equipment procurement procedures, and psychological support services specifically designed to protect officers working on cases involving ritualistic violence or occult criminal activities. Today, More than 3 decades after Detective Robert Harrison began his final investigation into the ritualistic murders that would ultimately cost him his life, his legacy lives in every safety protocol that protects an investigating officer, every advanced communication system that ensures rapid response to officer distress calls, and every specialized unit trained to handle cases involving organized crime groups with ritualistic or occult elements. The advanced technologies inspired by his case have evolved into comprehensive officer safety systems that combine artificial intelligence, real-time biometric monitoring, and automated emergency response protocols that can detect officer distress and mobilize assistance even when officers are unable to communicate their need for help manually. The American law enforcement community, once vulnerable to the extreme dangers posed by organized crime groups utilizing ritualistic violence and elaborate concealment methods, now operates under some of the world's most advanced officer safety protocols, with communication systems, backup procedures, and specialized training programs that have been developed specifically to prevent officers from suffering the fate that befell Harrison. The Harrison family, though forever marked by the horrific loss of their husband and father, had found purpose and healing through their tireless work to protect other officers, transforming their personal tragedy into a powerful force for positive change that has saved the lives of countless law enforcement officers who might otherwise have faced similar dangers while investigating organized crime groups with extreme violence methodologies. The investigative techniques and safety protocols developed in response to Harrison's case have been adopted by countries worldwide facing similar challenges with organized crime groups that utilize ritualistic violence, creating an international network of specialized law enforcement units trained to handle such cases safely and effectively. His photograph, taken during happier days when he smiled proudly while receiving a commendation for his investigative work, is displayed in the memorial as a reminder that he was a dedicated officer with a family who loved him, not simply a victim of criminal violence, but an individual whose death inspired fundamental changes that have benefited countless other officers throughout the world. Harrison's story continues to be told in police academies, federal training centers, and international law enforcement conferences that teach new generations of officers about the importance of safety protocols, backup procedures, and specialized training when investigating organized crime groups that pose extreme dangers to investigating personnel. The systems that now protect law enforcement officers during dangerous investigations are so advanced that many officers never realize the multiple layers of safety monitoring operating around them, from GPS tracking to biometric sensors that can detect stress indicators and automatically alert supervisors to potential officer distress situations. Each officer who returns home safely after investigating dangerous organized crime cases carries with them a bit of the legacy of Detective Robert Harrison, and every successful investigation of ritualistic crime that is completed without officer casualties fulfills the implicit promise that his sacrifice was not in vain. His story demonstrates that even the most horrific tragedies can be transformed into forces for good when love, determination, and commitment to protecting others combine to create lasting changes that save lives and honor the memory of those who died while serving their communities and protecting society from its most dangerous criminals.